Great. Well, we'll just wait for a few people to kind of join us before we kick off. What's the weather like in Utah? You're in, Erica?
I'm in Utah, yes, and it's pretty cold. We're we're just getting into winter, and our big thing right now is because of daylight savings. It's so dark so early. The days feel so short, and it just feels like it's the middle of the night at 5 p.m. It's really foreign and strange right now. I know we'll get used to it. It happens every year, but for right now, we're all just adjusting to how can it be so dark already? It feels like we're going to bed and it's, 6 p.m.
Yeah, it is crazy, but also you think we're actually only what 6, 7 weeks from the kind of starting to get lighter again, aren't we? So
That's a great point. I love that. I love having that in that perspective. And it's so fun too to get, ready for the holiday season. And for
yeah,
us, it's we are about to celebrate Thanksgiving next week.
of
Where
course, yes, that's a real sign that Thanksgiving's coming. I guess is like
yeah,
it's getting darker. Actually, it's
getting
like
dark. Yes.
you want to snuggle up with a big dinner and all that kind of good thing.
Yes, exactly. I have blankets, all the good cozy things.
Splendid. Well, it looks like quite a few people have joined us now. So let's kick this off. So
Absolutely.
welcome everyone. So my name's Adam Bird, CEO, co-founder of Chronify. We are a scheduling technology provider that have partnered with Bamboo. And part of what we're doing is we do an annual candidate expectations report and just surveying 6,500 candidates around the world to really understand their experiences and their kind of wants and needs from the hiring process. Now, I'm delighted that Erica is joining me today from Bamboo to discuss the report and to see how it kind of merges with her understanding and her experiences of the market. Welcome, Erica. Would you like to introduce yourself to everyone?
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, I'm Erica Wallace, and I'm a recruiting manager over at Bamboo. And I've been working with Bamboo for a little over 2 years, and I've been in the recruiting industry for just about 12 years now. And I thought this report was so interesting. There was so much, it was really fun to dig into that data and really to see, I think one of the things that was most interesting to me was some of the differences between different cultures and how candidate expectations can vary by region, which I think even in America can be so widely different depending on where you are. But it was also really interesting to see, some of the data that was really consistent, that, some people have so many similar expectations and experiences. There's a lot of universality that I thought was interesting.
Yes, yes, and I think it's fascinating because the kind of the genesis of this report was we were to quantify powers of scheduling for over 70 different recruiting systems. And so as part of that process, we wanted to really understand the market, and we could get plenty of information from vendors about recruiters' experiences, but very little experience about candidates' experiences. And given they're kind of important constituent in the
A little
process,
bit, yeah.
yeah, we thought we'd kind of solve that. But also deliberately look across kind of US, UK, France, and Germany to try and understand whether there are those regional differences. The report is available online. It's not gated. One of the team is going to put that in the chat very shortly. Please use the there you go. Please use the chat. Please, guys, any questions you have, ask them to everyone in the chat so everyone can see them and respond. Or you want to do a specific Q&A, happy to receive questions going forward. What we're going to do over the next 40 minutes now is really sort of talk through some of the kind of main findings of the report and really see how that chimes with your experience, Erica, and also what you see from Bamboo customers. So
Yeah,
should we kick off?
let's get into it. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So unsurprisingly, well, I say unsurprisingly, but responsiveness came out as the single most important thing in the hiring process for candidates. But I think what was really interesting was how this has changed over the years. So we're kind of 3 years into the report, and it was like 26% of people said it was like the most important thing back in 2021. We're up to 56% of US candidates said it was the most important thing. Now, I say US candidates because the UK was 52%, but France and Germany were a kind of quite a way down on that. And it's like Americans are impatient.
That was one of my favorite things to take away from that it's just it really plays into that stereotype. And I think it's so true that, Americans very, very much love convenience and for things to happen quite quickly. And so that impatient American stereotype has just proven itself. And I find that too in America, which is where I'm mainly recruiting. We will have candidates that do want to hear, and a lot of times our conversations with candidates will end with, when can I expect to hear from you? When is it appropriate for me to reach back out to you? And so a lot of times, a lot of our conversations with candidates here in the States is setting expectations about what they can expect, and trying to kind of temper them so that if a candidate is expecting to hear back that same day, we can say, hey, no, cool off a little bit. It'll take probably, maybe 3 or 4 days, or giving them kind of more perspective so that we can really address that need for responsiveness and a need for knowing what's going to happen that's so inherent with our American friends here.
But I think that's fascinating that the candidates are, your experience, you're saying that candidates are almost sort of trying to take control of the process.
Yeah.
And as you would almost a sales process, they're saying, well, when are you going to get back to me?
Yeah. What can I expect next? And I think some of that too is that Americans, and this is just from my experience, that a lot of our candidates are going to try to find, especially if they're actively looking for work, they're not going to put all their eggs in one basket. So they're trying to move things through quickly. They want to find the right position as quickly as they can. And I find that a lot with this economy and with the market right now, a lot of our candidates are actively interviewing, actively applying, and they don't want to lose one opportunity because they're waiting on another. So there's a big sense of urgency that we're seeing. And I think it has increased, even as you were mentioning, like from 3 years ago to today. That doesn't surprise me at all that it's gone up so significantly, that's where people are really concerned.
Yeah, and I think it goes a little deeper, because one of the things we pulled out from the research is that almost half of candidates have left a recruitment process because it took too long to schedule an interview.
Yes, that is so interesting to me. I think that is, and it's such an easy thing to fix, right? To fix that, to make that easier to schedule an interview. But I think that that's something we see all the time with candidates will tell us, oh, I was still waiting to hear back from this other company and I never did. So that's why I'm interviewing, over here, or that's why I'm still looking. And that becomes part of that narrative that the candidates will share as they're going through the interview process.
Yeah, I think if I put my employer hat on, and kind of how we operate, this is a kind of common thread amongst our candidates, is they kind of invest more in the process because we are responsive, and we can obviously schedule an interview, but the entire process is, we're putting them at the center of it.
Yes, it's such a great differentiator, because it's such a good way to make the candidate feel valued and feel like they're, like you said, like they're being centered. And if that's something that we can do, because we can control how we're responding and how responsive we are, it can make us such a different, it really sets us apart from competitors, from other companies that might be trying to hire that same candidate. And so when it's a competitive market, then you really can make a big difference by giving that candidate, it's almost like a gift to say, we're going to move quickly. We're going to give you really clear expectations about when you can hear from us, and we're going to get you scheduled so you know what to prepare for. I think that's so great to be able to do for your candidate as an employer. And then as a recruiter too, I think it helps, like a lot of times I'm sitting in the business seat, but sometimes too, there's the recruiter is sandwiched between the hiring manager who needs that hire and the candidate who wants the job. And so often the recruiter is kind of playing a little bit of both sides. They want the candidate to get hired ideally, but we're also looking for our hiring manager to find that perfect fit. And sometimes that hiring manager is really pushing that urgency too. And they're like, I don't know who to pick. And if we can get those interviews scheduled in quick succession, very quickly, then the hiring manager has an easier choice. They know who they know what the availability of candidates are. They can see and compare pretty quickly without losing track of who they've already spoken to. And it can help them make a decision quicker and better, so that they have the right people on their team to move their business forward. And so a lot of times as a recruiter, we're not just worried about that responsiveness of the candidate, but it helps everything. It helps the entire process move along.
Yeah, and I think you picked up on a really important point. The other constituent in this process is the hiring manager and the person doing the interviews. And we need to think about how we can ways of streamlining the effort for them as well. And I think, you know, it's interesting you said, scheduling interviews is an easy thing to fix. Now, it's an easy thing to fix if you have the right technology. Obviously, Chronify is one of those points of technology. But I think that it's one of those things, the technology exists, but it's not universally distributed. And so many people imagine that, you know, a multi-person interview. So the idea of having a hiring manager and another interviewer on the call, or just scheduling for a hiring manager, inevitably requires back and forth because of the tooling that they're aware exists. And there are, you know, I'm here to tell you, there are solutions out there that can solve this. And spoilers for the end of the webinar, we'll give you some top tips. But I think is looking at ways to allow the hiring manager to be responsive, as well as the candidate and as well as the recruiter, streamlines that entire process and basically make sure the candidate feels important. Because I think, was it just this data around 2/3 of candidates in the US would wait no longer than 6 days for an interview.
Yes.
Honestly. And even in fairly sort of chilled out, relaxed, long lunch France, it's over 50, it's 52% would not expect that. And so I think this is, you know, we talk a little bit about, you know, we can make a joke about kind of regional differences and kind of stereotypes around kind of impatience and things. But, you know, as we saw with the data, 50% of the people have left the recruitment process because it took too long to do. And people would not expect to wait more than 6 days. And so often it can take longer than that. And you're, as an employer, you're losing out on those candidates.
You absolutely are. You're losing so many candidates. And I am saying that from kind of a place of privilege of somebody who has the benefit of tools that can help to automate and I can take advantage of really great, you know, software and a great team that I have. But when I've worked, you know, without those tools and when I've been, you know, maybe in a solo spot or the sole recruiter for a company, it's so hard. And I forget sometimes how much back and forth there is and how not having the right tools really does make everything so much harder. It makes it so much more of a burden to, you know, to quickly respond to changes. I mean, we've had candidates call, you know, 10 minutes before to say that they need to change something, or managers call, you know, the day of to rearrange it. And it just, you know, you just puts a pit in your stomach of like, oh no, this could potentially cost us this candidate if we're rescheduling. And having
at the very minimum, it's a load of work.
Yeah, exactly. And it's so nice now to see, even just from when I started recruiting to today, to see how far technology has come to really like respond to that challenge and really like help with that pretty clear. I mean, when you have the right tools, it feels very easy and intuitive. And when you don't have the right tools, it's like nothing could be harder. It's so difficult to do.
Yes, it's the hammer. Yeah, wrong tool, wrong job.
Yeah.
So we're talking about responsiveness, and we're talking about how, you know, being super quick and like, you know, getting candidates through the process. The kind of like counter to that is another aspect of the research was around human touch, and 54% of candidates in France say human touch is the most important factor to an interview process. You know, 53% Germany, and actually it drops to 18% in the US, which I thought was really interesting. And I don't know whether I felt quite sorry for candidates in the US, where there's expectation where, no, of course I'm not going to deal with a human. I'm just going to be, you know, thrown, you know, or automated my way through this process.
Yeah.
What it feels crazy that we'd have to, candidates feel they'd have to choose between a human touch and responsiveness.
Yeah, I think that does make me a little sad. I think that makes me feel a little sad too, that they're presented as a dichotomy when really I think that they should go hand in hand. And I think having well automated processes allows for more human connection, because then instead of being stuck in this kind of administrative back and forth frustration of scheduling and, you know, waiting for someone to respond and waiting for the other person to confirm, instead, then you're having more meaningful conversations and you're having more of an impactful experience with that candidate once you can kind of eliminate a lot of that administrative hell. You can move into like what you really want. And I think I think Americans are really used to that idea that to have automation means less people. But automation is, there's a misperception, and maybe it's less of a misperception now, that that there's not recruiters looking at these candidates, and not real human recruiters aren't reviewing resumes, that it's just going through an AI system that's plucking out keywords and selecting who to move forward. And we do have tools that automate, eliminating resumes, but for the most part, it is a person whose real human eyeballs are looking at the resume and making the decision of if that candidate will be a good fit. And typically we're using those tools so that we can spend that more time on the candidates that are likely to be a good fit and will make a big difference in our company, the candidates that we want to hire. And I think it's a misconception, but I think it's very, very very, very popular idea that automation takes away from human interaction. And I think it's so great that you've made that point. And even in our conversation earlier, that having the right tool allows for more connection, not less.
Yeah, and I think so. My dealings with recruiters over the years is, to a person, they're people. Then they didn't get into recruitment to do admin,
right?
And actually, the idea that you have to kind of sacrifice, this kind of automation is the only way to kind of move forward, feels short-sighted, and freeing up the time for that human touch is so critical. But also, I think there are some practicalities you can see in kind of super high volume hiring, where almost there is frankly, it's a numbers game. And there isn't the kind of the luxury of that. So there's an automation piece around that. But certainly as you get candidates later on through the process, you want to free up time to do that kind of human touch. There's a age-old survey, or a kind of case study back in the UK. So internet broadband provider, they had such a poor interview process that they saw that impacting their customer churn, where people were actually cancelling the broadband or their not cable TV provider, because they had such a poor experience of interviewing. And so you can create such a bad experience that people will kind of reflect on it in that way, without that kind of, if you just treat people as a number through the process. So I think you always have to consider that. Another part of the data, though, I think, it depends as you're hiring kind of older people as well. So 81% of people agree that human touch is important, although not necessarily the most important thing. But when you get to the 55 plus bracket, that's over 90%. So actually, human touch is super important. And so again, depending on who you're hiring for, you'd kind of need to optimize your approach and free up time accordingly, I think.
Yeah, I think, you have to take a different approach and be flexible with your approach. I think one of the things that I think we were talking about too was there's definitely going to be like a different set of expectations depending on age range or on region. But everyone, I think it is a universal truth that everyone wants to feel valued, and everyone wants to feel heard and feel connected. And so nobody wants to feel like they're just being run through a machine. And I think, like, to the point of that broadband, I feel it really does impact your brand, and it impacts how people perceive your company and how people even interact with you in other ways, whether it's as a customer or even as a vendor or colleague. You'll have this brand perception. And so I think one of the things my company I'm so proud of and has really focused on is really creating a brand identity as someone that at all costs wants the candidate to feel valued. And so sometimes that does mean, we have a lot of high volume positions. I think for one of our roles, we had 27,000 candidates apply. And of course, we couldn't look at every one of those applications. So we have, little rules and triggers that we do set up using our tools to cut through some of those. But most of them we do try to look at. We try to look at as many as we can. And for those that we don't look at, we send an email immediately that is personalized to what their specific interaction was. So if the
Right.
candidate can't move forward because we've determined that they're not in the right location, we'll send a specific email that says, due to your location. So it's not that we didn't look at it or didn't consider it. It's because this is just a simple fact of, we need somebody in this space and you're in a different location. So that won't work. And that's the reason. And so then the person gets an email that, yes, it's automated. Yes, it's a template. Yes, it went out without, a human interaction, but it feels like you've been seen because it's actually acknowledging the real reason why you're being declined, and it's happening quickly. So there's not that waiting game either. And so that's one of the best things I think that we've been able to do to kind of maintain that brand identity, and also make sure that as we're, that we're taking care of every single candidate, because we wouldn't want the person that we hire to not get hired because we've been spending all of our time looking at 20,000 plus resumes, and I think that's the kind of that is where there may have to be some sacrifices, but I think it for good reason.
Well, I think that's a wonderfully pragmatic and effective use of technology to streamline that process, and I'd say a wonderful segue into the next point, which is around communication. In that,
Great.
yeah.
I did that on purpose, of course.
Absolutely, yes. So what was really interesting about this is communication came up in our survey, and so 2021, the candidates were saying lack of communication. 25% said that was the most frustrating part of the recruitment process. Now that's jumped to 41% just in those 2 years, and that kind of poor communication, absolutely creates all sorts of stress, anxiety, frustration. But also, I think you had some really interesting data about this as well.
We had it as much as high as 70%, and we were looking at red flags in the process. So what's something that makes you kind of not want to move forward with this company, or consider this company to have a red flag or deal breaker? And communication came up as with 70% as the number one reason, and then very closely behind it was scheduling issues. Was very, very high up there with having poor communication and then having poor scheduling almost going hand in hand of a red flag, of feeling like the company either doesn't value you or doesn't know what they're doing. They don't know how to handle scheduling. They don't know how to handle this, fairly straightforward thing. And I think it makes sense, like that communication piece is so important, because that's, for candidates, that's your first impression. And if your first impression is, I didn't hear anything for weeks and weeks. I know we had one of the people on my team who's been with us for more than a year recently got a decline email from a company that they had applied to before they started working for us. And so over a year later, they got their decline. And they were like, well, yeah, I had assumed by this point that I wasn't going to be, it wasn't between me and one other person at this point. They've been, happily working somewhere else for over a year now. And I think that's,
you almost wouldn't send that. It's like,
you almost wouldn't send it at that point. At that point, I think it was, I know. And that's what's so funny, is I think that does happen quite a bit. I think that that's something that can tend to be, you have a system that sends auto emails, and you just say, okay, fine, everyone that we didn't pick gets this standard decline email. But when you have a really personalized, or really, we try to set up a different email for every different candidate. And one of our things too is we have really, really clear expectations for how quickly we want to get back to people. So we always try to keep it at 48 hours with a touch point. So
Right.
whether it's, once the person's moved, to the next stage, they shouldn't be going 48 hours wondering what's happening, even if it's just to say, hey, we're still doing this, or we're still waiting on it. And so we have all of these different emails that we can send, just to at least send some sort of communication right away.
Yeah, and I think it's your company brand is less about what you say, it's more about what you do, isn't it?
Yeah.
And the recruitment process is probably a candidate's first almost like peek under the covers as to actually what the best chance they've got of trying to understand what it's like at the organization. And to your point, if basically you present it's through no fault necessarily of individual recruiters, but you present a situation where you just look disorganized or you can't get anything done.
Yeah.
The only reference that candidate has about the organization is that process.
Exactly. And if you have a brand that is all about being friendly and warm and nice, and then you send a cold, standardized template 3 months after being after interviewing, that's not going to match. And it almost makes it worse, I think, when there's that big, dichotomy between what people think what the brand is and then what their experience is. It almost makes them feel like betrayed, that, I thought this company was a nice, company that cared about me. And then now through the communication and through this interview process, they've revealed themselves to be just like every other company, or, just a very cold and heartless company. And so that's another way for a company to make a real difference, to really stand out from the pack, of really upholding whatever that brand identity that they want to have, and making sure that that's consistent. And so in that way, having a good interview process is part of branding, it's part of marketing, it's part of your overall business strategy.
Yeah, and I think that's because one of the challenges with kind of brand, and it kind of feels like such a big thing for the kind of recruiting teams can't influence.
Yeah.
So it's almost like, okay, well, actually, whatever marketing do, whatever is kind of said about the company, or whatever execs say on LinkedIn, or whatever it is, it's looking, I think, from a kind of practical point of view, it's looking at what can recruiting leadership do and talent leadership do to kind of make the brand of that process work and be a kind of a commitment and authentic kind of way of presenting the organization. And that starts, I guess, with the job ad, and then sort of kind of works its way all the way through to the I guess, rejection email, really, because there's going to be more rejection emails than there are going to be acceptances, I guess.
There's so many more rejection emails and actually declining well. It's something we talk about a lot, like how to decline well, because declining, if the candidate's getting selected, that's wonderful, but it's 1 out of 200 people is going to get that experience. And for the rest of the people, most of the people, they're walking away and they're going to feel a sense of hurt and a sense of rejection. And if you can help to, communicate, why it was that they weren't selected, I think that just, it solves so much of that hurt and confusion that people feel. And it's something that can really, I think one of the things that I really care about is, there's a candidate that we can decline and then years later end up hiring. A lot of times too, those candidates will, maybe we've declined them, but their neighbor or their sister or cousin, someone in their life or in their network, is the perfect fit for a really hard to fill position. And if we've burned a bridge by ignoring that candidate or giving that candidate a bad taste in their mouth, they've interviewed, they've gotten a dumb template that doesn't mean anything to them, and then they've had and then their friend is like, oh, I'm actually really interested in this position, and they say, oh no, that place let me down, that place didn't send
Don't
me
even
a great
try it.
yeah, don't even try. They weren't a very good experience. I mean, that's one thing that we can really, a recruiter and a recruiting team can really have a strong impact on preventing that situation and really maintaining a good reputation in the market, so that those candidates, they say, oh, I didn't get selected, but I'd still recommend them. And that's our gold standard. That's what we're going for.
Yeah, I think absolutely, yes. And I think it's interesting that it's almost another segue is kind of what I think is easy to forget is how stressful the process is for the candidate. And it's not necessarily just that particular process, but the whole changing a job is like alongside kind of getting married, moving house, having kids, in terms of the most stressful things one can do as a functioning adult. And it's easy. It's like the jeopardy for the candidate. This job can unlock, can be life-changing, can allow them to do things. Whereas it's for the recruiter, it's another candidate going through another process. And how do you as a recruiter think about that kind of dissonance of jeopardy?
Oh, it's such a great conversation. That's such a great topic. We've had a lot of conversations on my team about how can we make, each candidate feel valued and not get into that pattern of, okay, just another thing, and really generating that true excitement. But of course, yeah, it's our job, and we're offering people all the time and dramatically maybe changing the course of somebody's life. And right now, I think there's so many people that applying for a job is their full-time job right now. Like if there's been, layoffs or a slow economy, or there's a lot of things that have been impacting the world in these last few years, that for someone who's looking for work, that might be something that they're doing. They're waking up and they're applying and just really, really making so much effort to try to make an impression. And you can hear it sometimes in some of the candidates that I speak to, that it's been a really tough process. And sometimes, even if I'm not able to make them that job, just to acknowledge that I know it's hard, and just to acknowledge and make that connection of like, I know that this isn't, ideal. I know you're really trying. And I just have maybe too much empathy sometimes for that. But I think remembering that there is that person on the other side of it can really maintain that sense of having a good, authentic experience. And so making myself feel a little vulnerable to help stay connected with all of the candidates too is one of the things that we do. But we also, we like I mentioned, we have a lot of systems in place, and we have a great recruiting team. So we have a lot of people who are able to, to maintain those connections and to reach out. And for us, we try to call people after they've reached a certain stage of the interview process, so that we can have that conversation and decline well, and make sure that we're hearing what the person has to say.
Yeah, I think that's well, sounds like an amazing company to apply to. But I guess, yes, sorry, I was just thinking get my verbs in the right order.
Yeah.
But it was interesting because we've seen a sort of change in the data. So kind of last year, 38% of candidates said that kind of a whole scheduling delays affect their anxiety levels. That's up to 46% this year. The candidate female to males were like, sort of a third more females were affected by the delays than the males. So really trying to understand, like I say, that jeopardy level and that ability to, and that kind of going back to what we were saying kind of almost to the top of the webinar about this human touch and kind of tactical deployment of human touch. But that takes time, and that's freeing up the time to allow you to have those conversations.
Yeah, exactly. So we want to use, we want computers to do what computers can do. We want them to do things that can be automated. Anything that can be automated, let's do it. But then those things like having a conversation with somebody who's applied to 10 different jobs and is going to be getting to another decline, like having that call, I think can make a real impact and really be meaningful. And that's where I'd rather be spending my time than, with having to, filter through, sometimes, dozens and dozens of resumes that are, people applying blindly to things, or things that they're not really, truly a good fit for. But I think too, like with candidates and scheduling, we always also try to default to the candidate, and sometimes that's not possible, but whenever we can, the candidate should be the one who's setting the tone and setting the standard for what's like, if they have to cancel because they've lost a sitter or their childcare has fallen through, whatever they've got going on, then that's much more understandable than, our hiring manager, being double booked. We're always going to try to put the pressure on maintaining the candidate schedule and having our side, our team, flip things around however we need to make sure that we can accommodate that candidate schedule. And I know that's not always possible, but that's one of the things that we've made a sincere effort to do. And so sometimes having multiple partners in the recruiting process that can sub for each other if needed, if there needs to be a last minute cancellation, because canceling or rescheduling an interview for a candidate has so much more of an impact on their life than potentially on us as a business. And that's one thing that I think, really reframing that and thinking of it in that perspective, like if more female than male candidates are feeling that impact, I suspect a lot of that is probably due to childcare and probably due to the way that, the emphasis on childcare that tends to fall on women. So then typically that emphasis needs to be on, okay, if we've had candidates who have said, I've booked a sitter, I've driven an hour, and if I can't make this interview, like their whole day, that's an awful experience. And
Yes.
we never want that to happen. So we'll have people sub in and try to maintain that if we can.
Yeah, and I'm starting, we kind of work with kind of ultimately tens of thousands of companies, and we're starting to see a trend now where kind of SLAs around certainly tracking of a KPI around hiring manager reschedules, interviewer reschedules.
Yes.
One of those key things that once you have a sort of scheduling tool that can actually track what happens in people's calendars and kind of provide that kind of link end to end between the interviewer and the hiring manager and the candidate, you can start to really see the difference between who's actually doing the rescheduling, what those changes are, because the hiring manager is a partner in this process. And again, almost they're another step, potentially another step removed from that candidate's anxiety, because again, they're not going to, their job's fine, their job's not in jeopardy if they don't hire someone this week rather than next week. But the candidate's life is, if they don't get a job this week, that could be significant for them, or they don't get through that interview process. And I think what's really interesting from the data we saw was actually candidates want automation. So they kind of, so almost 3/4 of candidates said the smoothness of an interview process would affect their final decision as to whether or not to take the job. So if you can provide them that smooth experience, it's actually, fun enough, in finance, it was almost 80%. So I don't know whether there's something there, if there's any delays in it, over 2/3 of kind of media and marketing candidates wouldn't recommend the company in the future, just if there was delays or messing around on the scheduling side of things. So there's a lot of kind of expectation. Well, of course, I think people liken it a bit to the idea I can get a pizza to my house in 15 minutes. Why on earth can't I schedule an interview? Literally, how hard can it be?
Yes.
So
yeah, that's such a great point. No, I'm so sorry to interrupt, but I was just thinking of that. Like, I just had an experience recently where I needed to schedule a dentist appointment, and we had that, and it made me feel so frustrated of going back and forth. And they just listed different days, and I'm looking through my calendar and looking through what I have available, and that didn't work and that didn't work. And it was, 15 minutes of going back and forth. And I thought, this is just awful. Why can't you just give me a screen and I can pick the time I want and then just go to that dentist appointment? I don't want to go to the dentist. That is never something that I'm trying to to make happen, but I have to. And so that process was so painful, almost as painful as going to the dentist. And I think automation, it's not a dirty word. It's so helpful, and it can be so impactful, and it allows for such better experiences for people.
Yeah, and I think back to our data, 62% would prefer an automated system. Candidates don't want email back and forth. Yet it's still email and telephone are still the most common ways to schedule an interview, which is crazy. We're in 2023, but I do think, to kind of give the recruiters a bit here, is that there's that one-on-one's kind of easy to do. You can kind of link those together and conceive, but as soon as it gets to multi-person, it gets hard. And it's about, I guess there is tooling available to solve these problems. It's just not necessarily always available, and until now, spoilers. But it's looking for those kind of that application of technology to kind of solve those problems. But this is becoming a more and more important problem, as the data is saying, that we need to be more responsive. We need to communicate more effectively. And I love this idea around the SLAs around communication, that 48 hours you were talking about. And again, that's something else we're starting to see, that people are setting SLAs and SLAs around hiring managers as well, responding on candidates and scorecards and all those kind of things, because it is a contract, it is an agreement, and you can't go back to the candidate until the hiring managers has scored them.
Exactly.
So we could talk for a long time, but I'm conscious now we've talked for a reasonable time. What I'm keen is, I think we've described a lot of the expectations, the challenges, what are some things that people should take away from, what actionable things can our viewers take away from this webinar?
I think one of the things that really helped us so much was having a lot of different templates to choose from that could be uniquely applied to the different reasons why someone might be declined, whether it's, salary expectations or physical location, or, so many different things that, this position had already been filled by the time you applied. We're so sorry for that. There's so many different things that can happen. And then just taking a little bit of time at the very beginning to create templates makes it so much easier to just click through and give that more personal touch. So then you're not, sometimes you get that analysis paralysis. You don't know the right thing to say. You don't know the right way to say it. So you don't say it. And then you don't say it. And then a year goes by. And it's so much better to send an email, even if it is a cold template, quickly. And if it doesn't have to be a cold template, it can be a little bit more of a nuanced template. And so like for myself, a lot of the times I'll have a template that says, we had a great conversation. Now we'd like to schedule you for an interview. Here's the interview, link, click here to select a time that will work. But I'll include a little quick line that says, it was so much fun talking to you. I hope that your dog stopped barking soon after, or whatever the small situation happened that was, so that it's still me. I'm still doing that personal touch, but that email takes 2 seconds to send out. And I think that helps with responsiveness. And it's using a tool, but it's still human. And I think it allows the candidate to feel like, oh, of course, they're not going to write a personal email for every single person, but there's a little bit of that personal touch and a template. And so just having as much, set up at the beginning, it can be really helpful. I'm so sorry, I have to look at my notes. Oh, and then having benchmarks, having those SLAs, and having that be something that you discuss with your team, with your recruiters, with your hiring managers, and even sometimes if you want to share that with your candidate of what those expectations can be. And so if you're in France and maybe you want it to take longer, you can say maybe, it's 2 weeks until we will have a decision and we can get back to you. If you don't hear back from us within 2 weeks, then feel comfortable to reach out. Or in America, you can say, we'll get back to you in 15 minutes, or your pizza is free, and we'll get back to you as soon as we can. But setting those expectations and having them all be agreed upon by the managers, by the recruiters, and by the candidates, so everyone feels like they're on the same page. And I think it gives that obligation to the hiring manager and the recruiter that we've made a commitment. We need to make sure that we're, even if it's saying we don't know what we're going to do yet, at least having some kind of communication. And then finally, for me, I think just building an interview process that's very thoughtful about how and when you want to have those connection points. So if you can automate a lot of it and have things be very consistent, have automatic emails go out as much as possible, and then making sure that you're building into that process a time that can have that real human connection. So that might be between the second and final interview, you have a debrief with the recruiter that's longer to talk about where the candidate's feeling that day, or maybe you have a lunch at that point, or you do a tour of the office. There's different things that you can do to really build in more of a human connection while also having everything else be automated. And that can allow you both the tools and the better experience for the candidate.
Great, excellent. Well, I'm going to add one more.
Yes,
bit of a cheeky one, but essentially the whole purpose of the whole point of the Chronify Bamboo partnership is Chronify scheduling is now embedded within Bamboo. So if you go to the apps, any of you Bamboo users out there, if you go to the app section of your admin area, you can enable the Chronify plugin, and that will add a schedule interview button to any of the hiring screens within Bamboo.
That's going to be so big.
So you can give personalized scheduling that supports multiple people, not just you, other people as well. You don't have to be part of the link. It does all sorts of amazing things, and we'll talk for ages about it. But try it out, because it's completely free until the end of the year. Because really, this is the kind of first time we're kind of actually putting direct interview scheduling within Bamboo, and we'd love to hear your thoughts on it.
Oh, I didn't realize it was free for the end of the year. That's amazing. That's going to be so great for so many people. I love that.
Excellent. Right. So with that bombshell dropped. Any final thoughts for our viewers, Erica?
Well, I mean, it's written behind me, but so much of Bamboo is about setting people free to do great work. And so if software can automate and make things easier, and then it allows you to do more meaningful work, then do that. It's so important that the right tools and the right automation aren't a hindrance. They're a helper, and they can really help to make sure that you're doing more meaningful work and making more meaningful connections. So, I think both of our tools are really great examples of that, of how using technology is enabling more human connection, not taking away.
I can't follow that other than to say thank you, everyone. It's been lovely talking to you, Erica. Really enjoyed our conversation. Thank you for taking the time. You can follow up with the links in the chat of where you can follow up and download the report. But otherwise, had a fantastic time, and good luck with your hiring.
Oh, thank you. I really so much enjoyed this conversation, and it was so lovely to talk with you and learn more about Chronify. I'm so excited about all of the cool things that it can do.
Thanks all.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.